In the far corners of the galaxy, on a planet called Zorith, life was peaceful. The Zorith were an ancient species, their cities shining with crystal towers, their technology far advanced, and their hearts full of wisdom. For generations, they had lived without fear, isolated from the struggles of the universe. They were content, and their culture thrived in the quiet of their world. But peace doesn't last forever. One dark day, a great shadow fell across the Zorith's sky. The Varkarians, a brutal and war-hungry empire, arrived with fleets of warships, their engines screaming through space. The Zorith had never seen such destruction. The Varkarians had come to conquer, and nothing would stop them. They crushed Zorith's defenses with ease, their weapons tearing through the peaceful cities like a hot knife through butter. The Zorith tried to fight back, but their technology, although advanced, was not designed for war. They sent out every soldier, every warrior, every engineer, and every diplomat they had, but the Varkarians were ruthless. They captured the planet's leaders, burned cities to the ground, and took control of the Zorith's greatest technology, using it against them. As the weeks passed, the Zorith realized they were losing. The Varkarians were too strong, too organized. There was no hope for victory. Desperation filled the air. Some of the Zorith fled their planet, searching for refuge on nearby worlds. Others remained behind, hoping to buy time for their people, knowing full well that their survival was unlikely. In a final act of desperation, the Zorith turned to a long-forgotten option, their ancient network of distress signals. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. The signal would travel across the galaxy, reaching any race, any civilization, any warrior who could hear their cry for help, and they hoped, just hoped, that someone would answer. The message was simple, yet filled with urgency. We are under attack. Our world is lost. We seek assistance from any who can fight. The signal was sent into the stars, broadcasting the Zorith's desperate plea to the galaxy. Every planet, every moon, and every space station within range of the signal would hear it. Some would ignore it, as they had done countless times before with the cries of other worlds in need. But this time, the Zorith's message would be heard by a different force. Far away, on a planet known as Earth, the humans were not the peaceful species the Zorith had hoped to find. Earth, a world full of harsh conditions, was home to a species known as Deathworlders. These humans had lived through endless wars, surviving in a world where danger lurked in every corner. From the wild, dangerous creatures to the unrelenting weather, Earth had shaped the humans into the fiercest and most resilient beings in the galaxy. For centuries, the Deathworlders had earned a reputation for their incredible strength and their fearsome ability to survive in the harshest conditions. Their reputation for being fierce warriors had spread across the galaxy, causing many to fear them. But Earth's people were not interested in power or conquest. Instead, they focused on survival. They fought not for glory, but because they had to. Every day was a struggle to stay alive, to protect their homes, and to defend the ones they loved. General Kale was one of Earth's greatest leaders. He had led his forces in countless battles, guiding them through impossible odds. His name alone was enough to make any enemy reconsider their plans. He had survived wars, ambushes, and dangerous landscapes that would have crushed lesser men. His mind was sharp, and his spirit unbreakable. Kale was no stranger to the horrors of battle, but even he had no idea how his life was about to change. When the Zorith's distress signal reached Earth, it was met with silence at first. The message was unusual. Most distress calls from across the galaxy were ignored. The Zorith had never been known to engage in war, and their peaceful nature was well known. But something about their plea stirred something in Kale. Perhaps it was the desperation in their voices. Perhaps it was the recognition of a species on the edge of extinction. Or perhaps it was just the warrior's instinct, that told him there was a battle to be fought, one that could change the fate of an entire species. Kyle wasted no time. He gathered his most trusted officers and began to form a plan. Earth had never been involved in a war like this before, but Kale knew his people had the strength to answer the call. The Zorith were not asking for allies. They were begging for someone who could fight. And Earth's Deathworlders had never backed down from a fight. "We will answer their call," Kyle declared, his voice firm and determined. "We will fight for the Zorith. They may be peaceful, but their survival is our responsibility now." The order was given, and within hours, Earth's fleet began to prepare for departure. Ships were loaded with weapons and supplies, soldiers trained in survival and combat, and ships designed for the harshest of environments were fueled and readied for the journey. Kale stood at the head of the fleet, watching as the ships began their journey across the stars. They would travel through vast stretches of empty space, past worlds and moons, toward the distant cries of a dying planet. They were not there to conquer or claim. They were there to protect. As the fleet began to leave Earth's orbit, Kale looked out toward the stars, a deep sense of purpose filling his heart. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew that no one else would come. The Zorith had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. There was no turning back now. The darkness of space was vast and empty, but in that silence, Kale felt something stirring within him. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, a feeling of hope. The journey through space was long. The Earth fleet moved steadily through the black emptiness, their engines humming a low, constant sound. There was a quiet determination among the humans aboard the ships, a shared understanding that they were not just heading to another battle. They were going to save an entire species, one that had reached out in desperation. The Zorith were counting on them. General Kale stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. His mind was focused, running through the strategies and scenarios he had learned from countless battles. But this was different. The Zorith were not soldiers. They were not warriors. They were peaceful, and that peace had been shattered by an enemy that knew nothing of mercy. The Varkarians were ruthless, and Kyle knew they would not stop until every last Zorith was either dead or under their control. "How long until we reach the Zorith system?" Kyle asked, his voice calm but firm. "At our current speed, we'll be there." "In 5 days, General," replied Commander Rhea, a trusted officer who had fought alongside Kale in many campaigns. Her face was tense, the weight of the mission hanging over her like a storm cloud. "We don't have 5 days to waste," Kale muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Prepare the fleet for entry into the system. We may have to fight the moment we arrive." Rhea nodded and turned away, quickly relaying the orders to the crew. The fleet continued its journey through the stars, heading toward the unknown, toward the Zorith and their desperate plea for help. As the days passed, the human soldiers aboard the ships went through their preparations. They ran drills, checked their weapons, and made sure their equipment was ready for whatever awaited them. The Deathworlders had always been prepared for battle, but this felt different. The Zorith were counting on them not just for strength, but for protection. They had no idea what to expect from the Varkarians, but Kale was determined that they would not face them alone. On the 4th day of the journey, a strange signal came through. It was a low-frequency transmission, repeating itself in a pattern. It was a distress signal, but it was not from the Zorith. It was from a nearby station, a relay station abandoned long ago. Kyle ordered the fleet to investigate. "We'll stop by the station," Kale said, his voice steady. "It could be important." As the fleet neared the station, the dark outline of the abandoned structure came into view. The station was old, its once pristine surface now scarred by time and neglect. The fleet approached cautiously, knowing that such places could hide dangers or traps. But Kale trusted his crew. They were prepared for anything. "Scan the station for any signs of life," Kale ordered. "Scanning now, General," replied Lieutenant Mara, who was stationed at the sensor station. "It looks like it's been abandoned for a long time." "No signs of activity." Kyle nodded. "We'll dock and investigate. Be ready for anything." The fleet's lead ship docked with the station, and a small team of soldiers, led by Kale himself, boarded the station. They moved through the dark, empty halls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with dust, and the lights flickered on and off as they made their way deeper into the station. It was clear that no one had been here for years. At the heart of the station, they found what they were looking for: a control room. The walls were lined with old technology, now obsolete, but still functional. Kale approached the central console, his fingers moving over the buttons. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of encrypted messages. "What is this?" Kale muttered, studying the messages. He was not a technician, but he knew enough to understand that this was no ordinary distress signal. Someone had been monitoring the Zorith's communications. "General, you need to see this," Mara called out. Kyle hurried over to her side, his heart racing. She had uncovered something important. The station had been receiving signals from the Zorith for weeks. The messages were filled with fear and desperation, their words growing more urgent with each passing day. But the last message was different. It was a warning, a final attempt to reach anyone who might help them. The message read, "The Varkarians are closing in. We will not survive unless someone comes to our aid. We are reaching out to the Deathworlders. Please, help us." Kale's grip tightened around the console. The Zorith had known that help was coming, but they had no idea who it was. They had been waiting for the Deathworlders, and they had sent out their last cry for help to the humans. "This is it," Kale said, his voice filled with determination. "We are their last hope. We will not fail them." With that, Kale gave the order to continue, toward the Zorith system. The fleet was ready, and so were the Deathworlders. They were coming, and they would not stop until the Zorith were safe. The journey resumed, the ships cutting through the darkness of space like shadows. The Zorith's cry for help had been heard, and now the Deathworlders were coming from the shadows, ready to fight and protect. There was no turning back. The battle for the Zorith was about to begin. The fleet of Deathworlders was now close to the Zorith system. General Kale stood at the helm of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the stars outside. The dark void of space stretched endlessly before them, but his thoughts were focused on what lay ahead. The Zorith, a peaceful species, were counting on them, but Kale knew the danger they were about to face. The Varkarians would not give up without a fight. The Varkarian Empire had been conquering planets for centuries, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Their ships were massive and heavily armed, their soldiers brutal and relentless. They had the upper hand in firepower and numbers, and they had already proven how quickly they could crush civilizations that dared to oppose them. Kale had studied the Varkarians, and he knew they would stop at nothing to wipe out the Zorith. They would not hesitate to destroy any force that got in their way. "We're entering the Zorith system." Lieutenant Mara's voice broke Kale's thoughts. She stood at the station beside him, her hands steady on the controls. "The Zorith homeworld is ahead." "Keep us steady," Kale replied, his tone calm but filled with resolve. "We'll be in position within the hour." The Deathworlders' fleet moved. In formation, their ships sleek and designed for speed and agility. Unlike the massive, lumbering Varkarian warships, these ships were built for precision and quick strikes. Kale had trained his crew for years, and he trusted them with his life. Each member of the fleet knew their role, and they were ready to face whatever came next. As they approached the planet, the first signs of battle began to appear. Scattered across the outer reaches of the system were the remains of Zorith colonies, destroyed, abandoned, and burnt to the ground. The Varkarians had already begun their attack, leaving nothing behind but ruins. Kale clenched his fists, anger building inside him. He had seen the horrors of war before, but this was different. The Zorith had no army to fight back with. They had never known the brutal violence of galactic conquest. It was up to the Deathworlders to protect them now. "General, we're receiving a transmission from the Zorith," Mara said, breaking the silence. "They're reporting that the Varkarians are closing in on their capital city." "Put it on the screen," Kyle ordered. The screen flickered to life, and the face of a Zorith elder appeared. His eyes were filled with fear, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "General Kyle, we have done all we can. The Varkarians are at our doorstep. We have no more defenses. Please, we need you. We need your help now." Kyle's heart tightened at the elder's words. The Zorith were scared. They had never been in a situation like this before, and now their world was on the brink of total destruction. Kale turned to his crew, his voice firm. "We will not let them fall. Prepare for immediate deployment." The Deathworlder fleet shifted into action. The battle was about to begin. As the ships closed in on the Zorith homeworld, the Varkarian fleet became visible in the distance. The Varkarians had already set up a blockade, a massive ring of warships surrounding the planet, preventing any ships from entering or leaving. The Varkarian ships were dark and imposing, their weapons bristling with power. They moved in unison, like a swarm of predators closing in on their prey. "Varkarian fleet in sight," Lieutenant Mara reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "They're not giving us any room to maneuver." Kale studied the enemy fleet, his mind racing. The Deathworlders were outnumbered, but they had one advantage: their ability to strike fast and hard. Kyle had no intention of waiting around for the Varkarians to attack first. He had to act. "Prepare for combat," Kale ordered. "We'll hit them hard, fast, and before they know what's happening." The Deathworlder ships surged forward, moving at incredible speeds. They broke through the Varkarian blockade, darting between the massive warships. The Varkarians were caught off guard by the speed and precision of the attack. Before they could react, the Deathworlder fleet had already begun their assault. The first shots rang out, cutting through the silence of space. Explosions rocked the Varkarian ships as Deathworlder missiles found their marks. The humans moved with precision, weaving between enemy ships, striking at weak points in the Varkarian fleet. The Varkarians retaliated with heavy fire, their weapons tearing into the Deathworlder ships. But the Deathworlders were quick, their ships built to withstand even the harshest of conditions. General Kale watched the battle unfold on the screen, his expression grim. He was in control, but he knew that the real test was yet to come. The Varkarians were relentless, and they would not back down easily. The Deathworlders needed to make sure they protected the Zorith, no matter the cost. "Hold steady," Kale said, watching the chaos of battle unfold. "We need to draw their attention away from the Zorith." "General, the Zorith capital is under attack," Mara called out. "The Varkarians are moving in for the final assault. We need to get there now." Kyle didn't hesitate. He barked orders, directing the fleet toward the capital city. "Full speed ahead. We're not letting them destroy the city. Move out!" The fleet accelerated, cutting through the heart of the battle. The Deathworlder ships collided with the Varkarian fleet, dodging their fire and returning with deadly precision. The battle was fierce, the vacuum of space alive with the sounds of war. But Kale knew that this was just the beginning. They had to win this fight, not just for the Zorith, but for the future of the galaxy. As the Deathworlder fleet neared the capital, Kale's eyes narrowed. The Varkarians were getting closer to victory, but Kale wasn't about to let them take it without a fight. "Prepare to land," Kale ordered. "We're going in." The battle above the Zorith homeworld raged on. Explosions filled the void of space, lighting up the dark expanse with bursts of fiery orange and blue. The Deathworlder fleet fought fiercely, each ship darting in and out of the enemy formation, with deadly precision. The Varkarians were no easy opponent, but Kyle's forces were determined. Their ships moved quickly, striking hard and keeping the Varkarians off balance. But despite the fierce fighting in space, the real battle was still on the ground. The Zorith capital city, once a shining beacon of peace and knowledge, was now under siege. The Varkarian forces were closing in, determined to crush the last remnants of the Zorith's civilization. The Zorith had no army to fight back, no weapons to defend themselves with, and no hope of survival unless the Deathworlders could stop the Varkarians in time. On the ground, General Kale had led his forces down to the surface, landing near the heart of the city. The streets were eerily quiet, the once bustling metropolis now a scene of chaos and destruction. Buildings were crumbling, and the air was thick with the smoke of burning ruins. As Kyle's boots hit the ground, he could hear the distant sounds of battle. The Varkarians had begun their final assault. "General, we're in position," Lieutenant Mara reported over the comms. "The city's defenses are gone. The Varkarians are about to break through the final line of defense." Kyle's heart clenched. The Zorith had given everything to protect their world, but it was not enough. Now, it was up to him and his team to ensure that the Varkarians did not completely wipe out the last hope of the Zorith. "We'll hold the line," Kyle said firmly. "Everyone prepare for heavy resistance. Keep your heads on a swivel." The Deathworlders moved through the city, using their advanced tactics and training to navigate the destroyed streets. They were experts in survival, each soldier prepared to face any challenge. They moved swiftly, setting up defensive positions near the city's core, where the Zorith leaders had taken refuge. But Kale knew that the battle was not just about stopping the Varkarians, it was about gaining the trust of the Zorith. They had sent out a call for help, and now the humans were here to save them. If they succeeded, the Zorith would owe them a debt of gratitude. But if they failed, the Zorith would never trust another species again. "We're receiving a signal," Mara said, interrupting his thoughts. "It's from the Zorith leaders. They want to speak with you." Kael's brow furrowed as he took the comm device from Mara. The Zorith leader's face appeared on the screen, his eyes full of fear, but also a flicker of hope. "General Kale," the leader said, his voice trembling, We are grateful for your arrival. But the Varkarians are too powerful. Our people have already been crushed. We fear it is too late." Kale shook his head, his eyes hard with determination. "It's never too late. We will hold them off. Your people will survive. We're not leaving until the Varkarians are defeated." The Zorith leader nodded slowly, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "We have no army. Our technology is useless against the Varkarians. How can you hope to defeat them?" Kyle's gaze softened as he considered the leader's words. The Zorith were not warriors. They had never known battle. They had no weapons, no way to fight back against the Varkarians. They had only their peaceful nature and their belief in diplomacy. But Kale knew that the Zorith's greatest strength lay in their unity, in their determination to survive. "You're not alone anymore," Kale said, his voice strong. "We may be Deathworlders, but we fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. You have an army now, and we will stand beside you until the end." The Zorith leader's expression shifted, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. For the first time since the battle had begun, he seemed to believe that victory was possible. "Then we will fight with you," the leader said, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "Together, we can win this war." Kyle smiled, his confidence growing. "That's the spirit." With the Zorith now ready to join the fight, the Deathworlders moved forward with renewed determination. The Zorith had no weapons, but they had something that Kale's forces could use, their knowledge of the city and its underground tunnels. These tunnels, long hidden from outsiders, could provide the Deathworlders with a strategic advantage. Kale and the Zorith leaders quickly devised a plan. Using the tunnels, the Deathworlders would be able to strike from unexpected angles, catching the Varkarians off guard. They could sabotage key infrastructure, cut off supply lines, and weaken the enemy's position before the final assault. As the Deathworlders advanced through the tunnels, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The Zorith, who had once been helpless and frightened, were now standing side by side with his soldiers ready to fight for their survival. They were no longer just victims. They were fighters. The plan went into motion quickly. The Deathworlders infiltrated the Varkarian lines, using their knowledge of the city's layout to take out key Varkarian positions. The Varkarians were stunned by the sudden attack, unsure of where the next strike would come from. The Deathworlders moved with precision, targeting weak points and drawing the Varkarians away from the Zorith's stronghold. In the heat of battle, Kyle received another message from the Zorith leader. "General, we've discovered something. The Varkarians have a weapon, an energy cannon that could destroy the entire city. It's located near the center of their base. If we don't stop it, everything will be lost." Kale's heart sank. He had known the Varkarians would be ruthless, but this was worse than he had imagined. The Zorith had no chance against such a weapon. They needed to take it out, and fast. "Prepare for a full-scale assault," Kyle said, his voice filled with urgency. "We'll hit them at their heart and destroy that cannon." With the help of the Zorith, the Deathworlders launched a final assault on the Varkarian base. They fought their way through the city's streets, pushing the enemy back inch by inch. The Varkarians fought fiercely, but the Deathworlders were stronger, more relentless. The Zorith, once helpless, now stood tall beside them, using their knowledge to guide the humans to victory. As the battle raged on, Kyle knew that this was their last chance to save the Zorith. They had to succeed, no matter what it took. The battle had taken a heavy toll on both sides. The streets of the Zorith capital were now lined with wreckage, ruined buildings, destroyed vehicles, and the remnants of fallen soldiers. The Deathworlders had been pushing back the Varkarians, inch by inch, but the Varkarians were relentless. The tide of battle seemed to shift with every passing hour, and General Kyle knew that time was running out. "We've reached the outer gates of the Varkarian base," Lieutenant Mara reported, as she observed the situation through the view screen. "But their defenses are stronger than expected. We'll need to breach the main entrance to get to the energy cannon." Kyle nodded, his mind racing. They were so close to ending the Varkarian threat, but the last stretch of the battle was always the hardest. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just a fight for the Zorith. It was a fight for their future, for the galaxy's future. If they failed, the Varkarians would wipe out another peaceful civilization, and who knew how many others would. "Be next? We'll breach the main entrance," Kale said firmly. "But we need to move fast. The Zorith leader is counting on us, and so is the rest of the galaxy." His words gave the troops a renewed sense of purpose. They were used to fighting against impossible odds, but the fear of failure still lingered. Every soldier understood what was at stake. As the Deathworlder forces advanced toward the entrance, a troubling message came through on Kale's communicator. "General Kale," came the voice of Zorith's leader, his voice shaky with urgency. "We've discovered something terrible. One of our own has betrayed us. They've been working with the Varkarians." Kyle's heart sank. A traitor among the Zorith? How could this have happened? The Zorith were supposed to be united, a peaceful people who had never known the ways of war. How could one of their own turn against them in such a critical moment? "Explain," Kale demanded, his voice sharp. "The betrayal comes from within our own ranks," the Zorith leader continued. "One of our advisors, known as Terran, has been secretly communicating with the Varkarians. He promised them a way to defeat you in exchange for his own safety. He's been sabotaging our efforts from the inside." Kale's blood boiled. Terran, a trusted advisor, had been working against them all along. The idea of one of their own betraying the Zorith and the Deathworlders filled him with anger and disbelief. "Where is he now?" Kale asked, his fists clenched in frustration. "He's hiding somewhere in the underground chambers beneath the Varkarian base," the leader replied. "We've tracked his location, but it's heavily guarded." "I don't care about the guards," Kale said coldly. "I want Terran found and brought to me. He will answer for what he's done." The traitor's actions had complicated their mission, but Kale knew they couldn't afford to let him go unpunished. If the Deathworlders were to maintain their honor, they had to root out the traitor and ensure that the Zorith remained united in their fight for survival. Kyle quickly adjusted his plan. "Mara, we're moving to the underground chambers. Secure the area and find Terran. I want him alive." "Understood, General," Mara replied. She quickly relayed the orders to the rest of the team. The Deathworlders, though still weary from the ongoing battle, knew that stopping the traitor was just as important as defeating the Varkarians. The journey through the underground chambers was treacherous. The walls were narrow, and the air was thick with dust. The faint sounds of battle from above seemed distant, but the Deathworlders kept their focus. Terran had to be stopped. As they descended into the darkened corridors, they found signs of destruction. Walls had been torn apart, and pieces of machinery were scattered across the ground. It was clear that the traitor had been working with the Varkarians to sabotage the Zorith's last defenses. "We're getting close," Mara said, her voice low. "The readings are showing that Terran's location is just ahead." Kyle motioned for his team to take cover as they approached. They had to be careful. Terran's supporters would likely be nearby, ready to fight to protect him. The traitor had been playing a dangerous game, and now the Deathworlders were about to end it. When they reached the room where Terran was hiding, they found him, standing near a communications console, his back turned to them, unaware of their presence. His face was twisted with fear as he stared at the Varkarian transmissions on the screen. "Terran!" Kyle's voice rang out, filled with authority and anger. "You've betrayed your people! You've betrayed everyone who trusted you!" Terran spun around in shock, his eyes wide. For a moment he seemed frozen, but then his face hardened. "You don't understand," Terran said, his voice trembling. "The Varkarians promised me power, safety, everything I've ever wanted. The Zorith are weak. I saw an opportunity, and I took it." "You've doomed your own people," Kale spat, stepping forward. "You've sold them out for nothing but false promises." "I did what I had to do," Terran shouted, his eyes wild. "You can't win! The Varkarians will crush you! They'll crush all of you! I'm the only one who saw it!" Kyle's expression hardened. "You're wrong. You underestimated us. And now, you'll answer for your actions." With swift movements, Kale and his team apprehended Terran, securing him for transport. His betrayal had cost them valuable time, but the Deathworlders wouldn't let him escape justice. They had one last task before they could focus on defeating the Varkarians once and for all, bringing Terran to the Zorith leader and ensuring that the traitor would never again harm the Alliance. With Terran in custody, Kale turned to his team. "We've wasted enough time. We've got a Varkarian weapon to destroy." The final assault on the Varkarian base was still ahead. But now, Kale knew they had one more victory on their side. Uncovering the traitor had strengthened the unity of the Zorith and the Deathworlders. There was no room for betrayal in this fight. They would win, or they would die together. The Zorith capital lay in ruins, a city once full of life now covered in the scars of war. The streets were littered with debris, and the air was thick with the smoke of burning buildings. The Deathworlder forces had fought tirelessly, but the battle was far from over. Kyle stood at the front of his troops, watching as the last remnants of the Varkarian forces regrouped near their stronghold. The Varkarians, though weakened, were still a formidable enemy. Their leader, the Varkarian Emperor, was not one to accept defeat easily. Kale knew that the final battle was approaching. The Deathworlders had pushed the Varkarians to the edge, but they needed one last push to finish what they had started. "General," Mara's voice crackled through the comms. "The Varkarians are retreating into their final position. We're going to need everything we've got to break through their defenses." Kyle nodded. "We won't let them escape. This ends today." The plan was simple. The Deathworlders would launch a full-scale assault on the Varkarian stronghold, using every advantage they had gained in the battle so far. The Zorith, now united in their fight for survival, would join them in the final push. The Varkarians might have the numbers, but they lacked the will to fight like the humans and their allies. Kyle had no intention of allowing them to regroup or escape. "Prepare the assault teams," Kale ordered. "We hit them hard and fast. We're not giving them a chance to recover." The Deathworlder fleet, already battle-worn but determined, moved into position around the Varkarian stronghold. The plan was to hit them from all sides, overwhelming them with speed and force. The Deathworlders knew the Varkarians would fight fiercely, but they also knew that they were the better warriors. The Varkarians had underestimated them before, and Kale wasn't about to let them do it again. As the battle began, the Varkarians put up a strong resistance. Their warships fired relentlessly, sending waves of energy blasts into the advancing fleet. But the Deathworlder ships were fast, dodging the incoming fire and returning with precise, deadly strikes. The Varkarians, caught off guard by the speed and precision of the Deathworlders, began to falter. Kale's flagship led the charge, cutting through the Varkarian lines with ease. Explosions erupted around them, but Kyle remained focused, his eyes fixed on the Varkarian Emperor's flagship in the distance. The Emperor was not one to back down, and Kale knew that the final battle would be decided by their confrontation. "General," Mara's voice came through the comms once again, "the Zorith forces are moving in. They're holding the Varkarians off on the ground." "Good," Kyle said. "We need them to stay strong. This will be over soon." The Deathworlders and the Zorith, now fighting together as one, pushed through the Varkarian defenses. The ground shook as their forces clashed, but the Varkarians were struggling. They had no experience fighting a force like the Deathworlders, humans who had been forged in the fires of war, battle-tested and unyielding. Kyle's fleet broke through the final line of defense, reaching the heart of the Varkarian stronghold. He could see the Varkarian Emperor's flagship ahead, its weapons still firing, its crew desperately trying to defend their leader. Kale's eyes narrowed as he prepared for the final push. "Target the Emperor's ship," Kale ordered. "We end this now." The Deathworlder fleet focused their fire on the Emperor's flagship, their weapons sending wave after wave of energy blasts into the enemy ship. The Varkarians fought back with everything they had, but it was clear that they were losing. But the Emperor's flagship began to tremble under the heavy fire, its shields weakening with every strike. "General, they're not going to last much longer," Mara said. Kale clenched his fists. He had fought too hard and too long to let the Varkarians escape. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The Varkarian Emperor would finally pay for the destruction he had caused. As the flagship's shields collapsed, Kyle knew the time had come. "Prepare for boarding," he said. "We're going in." The Deathworlder fleet launched their final assault, docking with the Varkarian Emperor's flagship. Kyle led the charge, his soldiers following him with unwavering determination. They fought their way through the ship's corridors, their weapons cutting down any Varkarian soldiers who stood in their way. The Varkarian Emperor, seated on his throne in the heart of the ship, waited for them. His face was twisted in anger as Kale and his team approached. "You cannot win, human," the Emperor spat. "The Varkarians will never fall. We will rise again." Kale's gaze hardened. "Your empire ends today." With a single motion, Kale drew his weapon and charged at the Emperor. The two leaders clashed in a final, brutal confrontation. The Varkarian Emperor was strong, But he was no match for Kale's speed and skill. With a final strike, Kale brought the Emperor to the ground. The Deathworlders had won. The Varkarian Empire was no more. As the battle ended, Kyle looked around at the destruction, the fallen soldiers, the crumbling city, and the survivors. The Zorith had been saved, but at a great cost. The fight had been long and hard, and many lives had been lost. But they had succeeded. The galaxy would not forget the sacrifice of the Deathworlders and their allies. Kale turned to the Zorith leader who had witnessed the final victory. The Zorith, once fearful and lost, now stood tall. "It's over," Kale said quietly. "The Varkarians are gone. Your people are free." The Zorith leader nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We are forever in your debt, General Kale. You have saved us." Kyle shook his head. "You fought with us. You are no longer just a people in need of saving. You are our allies, and together we will rebuild what was lost." The final reckoning had come. The galaxy was forever changed, and the Deathworlders had proven their strength, their resolve, and their honor. The war was over, and peace had been restored, but Kale knew that the fight for survival was never truly over. As long as there were threats to the innocent, the Deathworlders would be there, fighting in the shadows, ready to answer the call.